start? Judges?
We're eager to start.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good morning, everybody. It is time to get started. My name is Jim Arnold, and I am your Uber judge for today, which means that I basically manage the room. These four people here are more the experts than I am, and it's their points and their judging that counts for the most. I'm from the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis, which is the co-headquarters of Wells Fargo, and so I've been definitely looking forward to this today. And I've been judging at IBECC for, gosh, quite a long time. I think it's just short of 10 years, and I'm on the advisory board for IBECC as well. We have something I'm going to read to you. You've probably heard this before, but in order to make the playing field level, we start out every session reading this. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are, we are, before you begin, or you ask to have it during your presentation, and that's fine. You'll have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, you will not be interrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. During Q&A, both you and the judges stay in character. And after the Q&A, we're going to give you some feedback outside the role playing. So after Q&A, you are yourselves again, basically, okay? And we are ourselves again. Some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part and should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using super technical philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds is a serious weakness. Similarly, any member of the team reading his or her part, that will be considered a major mistake, although you may use notes if you wish. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. Any questions for you before we start? Okay, let me sit down here and we will get started. And where is my timer? I guess
Is it on the table or
that's there. Oh, there's one right on the table there. Wonderful. Thanks for coming. Welcome to IBECC, and you may begin.
You got fired because you tried to do the right thing. This was said to Christopher Johnson, a former Wells Fargo worker, who was fired because he didn't meet the expectations, since he refused to do any illegal or unethical action to meet those expectations as most of his colleagues did. Good morning, dear Board of Directors. We are Navarra Ethical Consulting Group, and our team is composed by Paloma, Maria and Alicia, Carmelo, and myself, Borja. The bonus policy to middle managers generated unrealistic sales goals for cashiers who had to open fake accounts in order to meet those expectations. In September 8th, after the scandal went public, Wells Fargo made a settlement with the consumers to avoid being sued by them. But it didn't stop the feds to start an investigation on September 14th. These facts, added to the Senate hearing on September 20th, made the price of the share to drop during the whole month. Today, our goal, knowing that this reputational crisis added to the price drop in a federal investigation, we'll try to identify those specific challenges and find those remedies for you, the Board of Directors. Now we'll step aside for my colleague Carmelo, who will do the economic analysis.
Thank you, Borja. And now, to continue with the explanation, it's important to highlight the financial scope. Previously, and before September 2016, retail banking at the United States was struggling in a low interest rate environment. Likewise, there were too few credit-worthy customers eager to increase their borrowing and help retail bankers to develop their sales figures. In this context, we have encountered 2 alternatives that would allow retail bankers to develop their business. Previously, they could make more money with the same number of products. On the other hand, they could simply increase the number of products per customer. This technique, this business model, is known as cross-selling. Banks like Wells Fargo choose the second alternative as the best way to develop their business, and the consequences of this business model are currently perfectly known. The system has normalized the kind of unrealistic target that prompt these rogue employees to begin opening the fake accounts. Moreover, the financial scope provides us with another important circumstance that we have to consider. Recently, a prestigious newspaper published an article in which the following statement appeared: "Let's be grateful that the banks have finally provided us with a scandal that we can understand." What is the relevance of this question? I try to explain it. Paradoxically, in spite of the fraud, in spite of the financial fake accounts, in spite of the scandal in general, Wells Fargo net income has not suffered a drastic drop since the settlement. According to Wells Fargo corporate predictions, they have beaten their forecast. According to Bloomberg, the Wells Fargo income per new fake account was $1.14. The total income obtained during the whole fraud period was $2.4 million. The proportion that it implies over the total income, the net income obtained during the one quarter, is only 0.05%. And the penalty is 77 times as large as the total income obtained during the whole fraud period. In conclusion, this fraud has not been profitable for Wells Fargo as a corporation. Wells Fargo had the honor of being the most profitable company around the world since 2012 at the marketplace, but today it just isn't. The reason? An enormous mistake. The consequence? A terrible reputational crisis. According to the previous explanation, this fraud, the major characteristic of this fraud is that it's perfectly understandable for the general audience. To add to this, the reputation in the banking sector is usually put into question. Wells Fargo reputational crisis has increased due to the belated, because Wells Fargo take more than 1 week in so public apologize. Inefficient. Wells Fargo only accused the workers. They didn't accuse any manager. And insufficient because where they said enormous mistake, they should have said crime. Wells Fargo has underestimated the problem. One of the most important circumstances that we have to consider in a reputational crisis is the design of a corporative language to explain the problem. And this corporative language must be based on the defrauded customer positions. Otherwise, if the company look at itself, they risk having an empty corporative language. Moreover, and according to the Reputation Institute, the financial mispractice, the fraud, and the lack of transparency are the most important risk for the reputation at the financial sector. How will the social perspective, the social perception of Wells Fargo on the next months? How will be the consequence of this? According to the metrics, the perspectives are quite alarming. For instance, new consumer checking accounts will drop around 40%. Consumer credit card application will drop 45%. And customer loyalty score will drop around 10%. It's absolutely necessary to try to improve this situation. And now, my colleague Borja will continue the presentation with the legal scope.
Okay, to summarize the economic part, here we send 3 important targets that we have to focus on. First of all, control the cross-selling practices. They actually have risk in a legal perspective too. Also, analyze if the compensation to customer has been enough. And lastly, to try to focus on the stop of try to stop the fall in the stock price. So now we're going to focus on the legal challenges. Has any precept or any law been violated by this performance? The California Criminal Code has these 2 articles. First of all, in section 530.5.8, it has the identity theft. It requires, first of all, the use of personal data, as we've seen it has happened in Wells Fargo, involving fraud or deception for an economic gain. We've seen that this has actually happened in Wells Fargo. Secondly, impersonation in section 529C, which requires assuming the identity of another person, which they did to open those accounts, as well as gaining a benefit, an economic benefit. So who can be held responsible for these crimes? First of all, we can analyze the performance of the employees. The general theory of criminal law in the United States usually requires mens rea versus actus rea. Mens rea refers to the state of mind of the person performing the crime, what is he thinking when he performs, and if he knows that he's committing a crime. Actus rea means actually performing the crime. So we see that the employees were absolutely knowing what they were doing, but we know that there was a lot of pressure from the management since some of their colleagues were being fired for not meeting the expectations. Can this be understood as duress? It could justify the crime. Well, the courts in the United States, to appreciate duress, have usually been requiring an immediate threat of death or serious injury, and so great that it overbears the ordinary powers of human existence. Well, the threat of being fired, the courts have understood that it cannot be understood as duress. So employees could actually be responsible criminally talking. Going to the managers, we know that they didn't open any account, but they act in a negligent way with an absence of a state of care. This has been collected in some cases. The responsible corporate officer doctrine developed in the case Park versus the US, and it says that managers can be held responsible if they knew or should have known what their employees were doing. Here we see a letter that was sent to the CEO, Mr. Stumpf, in 2007, that's almost 10 years from now, who documented the illegal activities. But as we've seen lately, some managers are just too big to jail, so it would be difficult for them to go to jail. So let's go to the important part for you, dear Board of Directors. Can Wells Fargo be held responsible for the performance of their employees? There's this important theory that has been seen in a lot of courts in the United States, the respondent superior, that collects the necessary elements to find a company, an organization guilty for the crimes done by the employees. First of all, a crime must be done in the company. We've seen that the Criminal Code of California has impersonation and identity theft, and they both have been done in the company. Second, it has to be in the scope of employment. The employees were actually performing their job when they committed those crimes. And thirdly, it has to benefit the company. This here will be the point to where focus the defense strategy, since as we have seen, the benefit was only 2.4 million in 10 years, while it only means a 0.05% in a quarter. So the benefit is arguable here. But let's not forget the principles of federal prosecution of business organizations that are very important. First of all, the wrongdoing of corporate management. Here we could say that the manager had been acting wrong because of the negligent theory that I explained before. Also, it's very important to take into account the willingness to cooperate. We are still there, we can help the feds with information and the cooperation they need. Also take some remedial actions. We've said that we still have to analyze if the compensation to customers has been enough or not. And finally, timely and voluntary disclosure. I think that this is a very important point. It has taken for the company 10 years to take the disclosure, but for the future, it will be very important to take that into account. So now, my colleague Alicia will start with the ethical analysis.
Thank you, Borja. So, summarizing the legal analysis, we have to consider the possibility of Wells Fargo being held responsible for the crimes of the cashiers. However, to avoid future similar situations, it's very important to have a well-designed compliance plan. And now we are going to go through the ethical analysis. So, did cashiers and bankers act in an ethical or in an unethical way? So first we want to highlight the difference between responsibility and accountability. So responsibility focuses on being the authors of an action, while accountability seeks to explain the actions performed. So about the manager's accountability, we know that the sales goals of the cashiers were incentives for them, and that's why they pressured them to open new and fake accounts. And they told them to open new accounts to their family or friends with or without their knowledge. So they were totally conscious about what they were doing. And they did all that in order to achieve some psychological needs, such as prestige or the feeling of accomplishment, in addition to the economic compensation. So in our opinion, we think that they should have acted according to the stakeholder model. So they should have taken the decisions considering the interest of the customers, the employees, the shareholders, and the society in general, and not their own interest. So we think that they didn't act in an ethical way. And on the other hand, we have the employees' responsibility. So the sales goals for the employees were real goals for them. There were not incentives as for the managers. So we have considered two factors in order to analyze the employees' responsibility. The first one, the intellectual knowledge. We want to know if some lack of knowledge concurs in the actions of the cashiers. So we can distinguish three aspects of ignorance: the invisible ignorance, the visible ignorance, and the intentional ignorance. So in that case, we know that they open new accounts with fake mails, such as, for example, 123.wellsfargo.com or something like that. So you don't have to be an expert in retail banking to know that you are not doing something wrong. And on the other hand, we have the will's consent, that we know that several factors can modify the voluntary nature of an action, such as, for example, mental illness or intellectual fear. And in that case, they have a fear of losing their job. So even if it's difficult to say that they all act in an unethical way, we can say that in general they did, because they normally open fake accounts to those who they think they would not notice, like us, for example, elderly clients or people who didn't speak English very well. So even we should go case by case to see if some of them have some mental illness. We think that in general they didn't act in an ethical way. And now about the corporate analysis. We know Wells Fargo had an ethics hotline that was supposed to be a confidential way to report the violations of the code. But, however, some employees called to report misconduct internally, and the response of Wells Fargo was to fire them in few weeks or months, and the reason was they did not meet expectations. So this maybe has increased the fear of the other employees to lose their job, and that's why they didn't call to the ethics hotline. Also, Wells Fargo had a code of ethics with values such as honesty and integrity, but with all this scandal, these values has been violated. So this has decreased the customer loyalty, and we want to help you to recover it. And doing all this during a long period of time, since 2005, has created a toxic culture, and this has received a marked punishment. And that's why in the action plan we will give you some recommendation to restore that culture. And what about top managers? Should top managers have known? It is true that top managers didn't have a direct relationship with the cashiers or even with the bankers. But since this was happening since 2005, and in that period of time, 5,300 workers have been fired, we think that at least they should have known something. And also, as my colleague Borja has said before, some of the employees reported directly to the CEO, Mr. Stamp. So we will give you some proposals to do regarding to the top managers. And now my colleague Maria is going to talk about the action plan.
Okay, so here there's a brief analysis of what we have, the challenges we have explained until now. So the ethical challenges explained by my colleague Alicia are mainly to restore the confidence, also to eliminate this toxic culture that has been somehow created, and lastly to install some change both in employees and in managers. So we have now created an action plan in order to give you some recommendations to take now after having analyzed the legal, ethical, and economic challenges. So our plan is divided into the corporate plan, the personal plan, and the compliance plan. I will go through the corporate plan, and after that my colleague Paloma will explain the personal plan and the compliance plan. So the first measure of the corporate plan is focused on restoring the corporate culture of Wells Fargo, and also to return the lost loyalty to customers and also to employees. So we think this is a very hard situation, but taking into account that Mr. Stamp is not here right now, we really consider that the best measure to reach that goal of restoring the corporate culture, we really think the best measure is to consider appointing a new CEO. So we have thought about a person who has some years of experience at Wells Fargo, someone who was not related to the scandal, and someone who is an advocate of the corporate culture, the corporate values of your company. The second measure of the corporate plan is to introduce accounts review system. The goal of this measure is mainly to restore the confidence. So on the one hand, from the perspective of the clients, we really think it would be very good if they could access an information portal whenever they want to see their accounts, their products that they have hired with your company, so that they feel more confident and secure about what they have. And also, it will be very good for them. They will be more confident if they receive an invitation from the bankers to review their accounts, now and in the future when they want. On the other hand, from the Wells Fargo perspective, we really think it would be very good to do now a general communication to every employee, a personalized communication, because now, to every client, I wanted to say, because now many clients may have lost confidence, they may feel insecure, they may not know which products do they have or how many accounts have they opened with Wells Fargo. So it would be very good, a general communication, so that they know what they have hired with you. And also, every time they purchase a new product, it would be very good if they received a confirmation email or an SMS with the terms of the contract and the useful information they need. And also, it would be good to contact the credit card customers with the same idea to restore their confidence. The third idea, or the third recommendation included in the corporate plan, is to improve the ethics line. My colleague Alicia has told something about the ethics line. Until now, it has been managed by the third party. We really think this is how it has to be, because in that way the protection for the employees is guaranteed. So we recommend you to keep doing it that way. But we also recommend you to base the ethics line on the SEC whistleblower program, because in that way that is going to give more protection to employees. As we have said during the presentation, some employees were fired when they called the ethics line, so they had the fear that if they called, they would lose their jobs. So that's why many of them didn't call the ethics line. So we really think that should change. So another idea of that program is to give monetary awards temporarily. In that way, this is an incentive for the employees to call and tell any fraud is being made in the company. So we think it's a good idea. And also the ability to report anonymously. In that way, employees who don't want to give their identity every time they call to the ethics line, they don't have to do it. And we really think this should apply to every state. The last point of the corporate plan would be to create an ethics committee. This committee, we think, should report directly to the CEO of the company, and the main function would be to deal with the ethical and controversial situations of the firm. It would also supervise the company's relation with the workers and with every stakeholder. Also, it should manage the reporting hotlines. As I explained, the ethics line is going to be managed by a third party, so the connection between this third party and Wells Fargo will be within the ethics committee. And lastly, the ethics committee should ensure that every employee is adhered to the code of conduct that you already have. So now my colleague Paloma will continue with the personal plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Well, now that we have seen the corporate plan, let's jump into the personal plan and compliance plan to finish our presentation. Our personal plan revolves around two actions: replacing the existing retribution system and developing ethical training programs within all levels of the organization. So first, replacing the retribution system. We have explained throughout the whole presentation how we believe that the existing goal retribution system is the underlying cause of the fraud. The pressure that this goal retribution system put into workers caused them to open fake accounts and take unethical and even illegal practices that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So our suggestion is that we move from a goal-oriented approach towards a more incentive-oriented approach. This will help workers feel more in tune with the corporation and develop a sense of belonging as well. So we have developed two different programs for cashiers and bankers. Cashiers are Wells Fargo employees in direct contact with the clients and in charge of opening new accounts, whereas bankers are Wells Fargo employees in charge of cashiers and generally have an office at their charge as well. So for cashiers, we think that their retribution should be divided between goals, because we think that this is very important for their motivation, but also another percentage should be assigned to incentives. And in order to alleviate the pressure that goals have been causing so far, we suggest two measures. First, that goals are area focused by small areas. This means that Wells Fargo would have to invest time, money, resources in order to investigate what the market potential of each area is and establish goals according to this market potential. And this means that each Wells Fargo employee will be asked to reach goals that are realistic. And the second measure is to establish a sort of buffer measure that allows cashiers to miss some of their goals, for example, once every 3 months or 4 months out of the natural year, so that they know that if they miss their goal, this won't mean that they will be fired directly. And then for bankers, we think that it's a good idea that their retribution system is linked to incentives, but they should not rely solely on the sales made by cashiers, because this is not only unrealistic but unfair. We think that some of those incentives should be tied to some activities that they develop themselves. So, as I will explain in the next slide, we think that a good idea is that they are compensated for training cashiers in ethical issues. The next step is to develop ethical training programs within all levels of the organization. We have designed 3 different programs for cashiers, bankers, and top managers. For cashiers, we think it's important to spread the use of the Code of Ethics and Business Conduct, which you already have, and it's really good, but it needs to be implemented. Next, we would like to promote the ethics. This program should be interactive, relatable, and easy to follow. And we think that it should take place 4 times a year, 3 times in a digital way, so that cashiers can follow it with their own computers, and once a year physically. And then the program aimed towards bankers is a little different. It's supposed to help them identify problematic behaviors within the organization and also develop their leadership and motivation skills. And we think that they should be the ones in charge of teaching this ethical training program to cashiers once a year. And lastly, our top management training program is aimed to teach the top managers, give them some knowledge about the legal environment in a simple and informative way. The same way my colleague Borja has explained to you, for example, the consequences of such actions. And also, this program aims to teach top managers to communicate with middle management regarding ethical issues, and also to develop ethical conflict resolution skills. And we believe that for bankers and top managers, an annual training program would be enough. Last, let's look at our compliance plan. We hope it to be simple but effective. When we were designing our plan, we started wondering what happens with those functions that are now assigned to our ethics committee that Maria has explained. Because in Wells Fargo's existing structure, those functions such as handling the hotline and handling ethical issues are nowadays under the eye of the Chief Compliance Officer. So those functions will no longer be under his scope, but rather under the ethics committee. But we believe that these 2 functions, ethical and compliance, should not be separate. If they were to be isolated, it would be very difficult to identify problematic behaviors and put an end to them. So we believe that communication channels should be established between the Chief Compliance Officer and the Ethics Committee as soon as possible. Whether it be regular meetings, by the use of newsletters or emails, this is up to you and you can see how it best works within the organization, but we think that this is a very important measure as well. So this is the end of our action plan. So let's take a look at how each of these plans would help us with our challenges. We believe that our corporate plan will help you with your ethical and economic challenges by showing a renovated and strong image of Wells Fargo. On the other hand, our personal plan aims to eliminate those toxic attitudes and make sure that they don't happen again. And our compliance plan works overall, ensuring that there's a coherence to the system and also ensuring that if new actions were to arise, they would quickly be identified and given a solution. Our conclusions that we hope have come across during the whole presentation are the following. First is that the key challenge for Wells Fargo in the long term is to eliminate the existing toxic culture within the organization. It's the main cause of the problem, but also the answer to its solution. But it's fixable. It's an easy one. Next, we hope that although the negative economic impact of the fraud is worrying, as my colleague Carmelo explained, we believe that it should subside in the short term if we succeed in implementing this action plan effectively. And last but not least, we encourage you to see this not only as a failure, but also as an opportunity to rebuild your existing relationships with your clients and to position Wells Fargo as an ethics pioneer in the retail banking sector. Let's not forget that, after all, there's people behind this fraud. And these are some of the former Wells Fargo employees that have lost their jobs to the scandal. Let us act now. In this way, we will make sure that this toxic culture doesn't affect whether it be employees, the clients, or even yourselves. Thank you very much, and we are open to questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just we'll move right into the judges' challenge for 20 minutes, and whoever would like to start, please.
So I'm interested in your point of there should be less incentives. Why? Because what I see the problem here was a lack of overview. This should have been caught very early on. So there was no control mechanism to be looking at this. But no corporation has salespeople without incentives. So I want to understand your thinking behind suggesting less incentives. I agree with you on the fraudulent nature of the actions. I agree we need to rebuild our reputation. On a financial, the actual fraud, it was did not have, as you pointed out, a financial impact, but our stock price and our ability to attract new customers in retail, definitely. But I really want to understand what you mean by less incentives. Are you talking about in half? Are you talking about down 10%? And why you're suggesting that? Because salespeople expect to be compensated. I mean, we should not have had salespeople committing fraud to build revenues. That is completely wrong. So I see the problem as a checks and balances system that you normally have in any corporation. So please discuss with me more what your recommendation really is on less incentives. I'm having a problem with it.
Okay, so I think that I believe our idea is that it shouldn't be less incentives in absolute terms, but how they are, so less incentives linked to the performance of cashiers. So less incentives linked to the sales figures. So in this sense, it does go against the traditional retail banking idea. Because we saw a problem that if I'm a manager, I'm a banker, and my retribution is linked to someone else's actions. So it's not completely fair. So we believe that part of that of those incentives, so in that sense it's lower, should be linked to activities I perform myself that are not directly linked to sales.
Okay, but your teller is the first, one of the lowest paying jobs, and second, it is the first interface with the customer. So if I have someone who treats customers well, where they want to continue to do business or increase their business with Wells Fargo, as long as it's not fraudulent, because in my own account with Wells Fargo, I have a do not solicit. And I've had that since 1996 rule. So they can't sell me anything. But if I'm willing to hear that, they will ask me if they can still talk to me about something, even though I have a no solicit on my account. And then I give them permission. So if that person is the biggest interface we have with the retail customer, so we don't want to give them compensation for doing a good job. Again, I'm in agreement with what you're saying here about you can't like create accounts for people that don't exist or more accounts for people that do exist without their permission. Totally agreed. But I'm having a problem with sales and generation of revenues and not being compensated.
That's why we didn't want it like to eliminate the incentives at all. We just wanted like our recommendation was to lower them. It's up to you like the percentage or whatever. It's just we thought it was a good measure to avoid this problem to happen again.
In fact, we introduced incentives for cashiers. The idea is that cashiers that are those in contact with the public didn't benefit from incentives. The only relationship they had with sales were goals. So either they met the goals or they didn't. And our idea is that now they have goals but also incentives. So that incentives reward both cashiers, those in contact with the clients, and bankers who were the only ones benefiting from the incentives, but they weren't the ones in contact with the client. So with this idea of separating the two retribution systems, we made sure that they had a sense of belonging, so they were both working towards the same direction.
I have a concern with the fact that there was nothing broached about oversight. So while the fraud did happen face-to-face cashier to customer, it wasn't from their impetus. It wasn't them that made that decision. A goal is obviously something that can then pressure them. However, there was no oversight, and I think that one of the things that I would have been, that I'm interested in exploring is this, an account was an account was an account, and if we're to incentivize it, shouldn't there be a good account? So something that was viable. It wasn't just a fake account. If I'm going to be incentivized, maybe it's on the tail end of how effective it was or how profitable it was. And where is that oversight in those kind of metrics?
Well, yeah, the
You
thing
can
is,
blame us as the corporate board of directors. You can blame us for not proper oversight, so don't feel like.
no, the thing is that obviously it happened in the past. The only thing that they were taking into account was the number of accounts
Right,
opened.
right.
So that's the actual problem. Since, yeah, if they were done that of actually looking at the quality of the account, it wouldn't have happened. But our measures, actually, that won't be necessary if our measures are implemented.
How so?
Because the customers will have all the information about the accounts being open. So it would be just easy as go to the office and say, hey, I didn't open that. So that won't happen.
So what the measures we explained that they can like enter to information portal and have all the information they need, we really think like the overseeing now is not going to be necessary, because they will be like all the clients now are going to be sure and have control on the products they have, because they have a lot of they can access this portal, they can have meetings with bankers, and every time they hire something new they will get a confirmation email with all the terms of the product or whatever thing they have opened. So we consider with these measures it would be enough.
So devil's advocate, what about the fake ones that actually had no real customer behind it? Those still exist. And there's no, if the only gatekeeper is me as a consumer, if there is no consumer, there is no gatekeeper in your plan.
Yeah.
We should have an automatic confirmation, no, sorry, not an automatic confirmation, a personal confirmation to say that.
That would be a good stopgap, right?
It's true that we have not delved into studying how to improve the quality of the accounts, which would be advisable, but we thought it didn't fall under the scope of this ethical issue maybe.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's true that we haven't studied how to improve the quality, but...
Jeff, Jonathan?
Just one quick comment on this last issue, but I'd like to come back to some things that you did exceptionally well, I thought. Let me state those first. I thought that you did, helping us as a board understand our legal exposure and potential for defense. You did an excellent job of describing the reputational impact, including things like stock price. 77 is a number that I'll remember throughout my time as a board member of this fine corporation. And you also, with the pictures at the end, among other things, made it very clear that employees were deeply affected, and when talking about reputation, that customers were deeply affected. You made the point earlier about how we as a company have not handled this well. Of course, we're blaming on the old CEO, but you talked about how they described their reaction in corporate terminology. I don't remember exactly the phrase you used, rather than in terms that would be meaningful to those that are watching, such as consumers, even employees affected, certainly governmental authorities. But much of what you described here is a very sort of corporate, we'll have a committee, we'll have this, we'll have that. Within that, you have a lot of insights, like